The truth about trauma. Y'all ready? Let's go. So, you know how sometimes when you eat like way too much Chipotle or Popeyes or whatever it is, and it just is like stuck like right at the top of your stomach, and it's just like a traffic jam, just like cannot move because your digestive system can't process it? All right, bear with me. That is actually a pretty good parallel for what happens with trauma, which is when you cannot properly digest your experience. So there's a lot of different versions of how trauma shows up, and there's actually a weird stigma about even what trauma is. There's one consistent identifying factor that defines trauma, and it is a lack of agency, which, thanks to my high school Latin teacher, Miss Holly, I know comes from the Latin root word agere, which means either to do or to manage. So that means that a trauma is any situation where you do not have the control to change your situation or adequate tools to manage your situation. Low-key, these terms I'm about to use I don't actually love. However, they're a suitable shorthand for today, and if you want to fact check me later, it'll be pretty accessible to look up. So the psychology world uses the term big T trauma for anything that is like usually regularly considered trauma. So that is being a witness to or a victim of violence, an assault, an attack, anything like that. Being party to a disaster, a car accident, war, a natural disaster, hurricane, tornadoes, etc. Even being forced to do something against your will, being kidnapped, being held at gunpoint, all of that is big T trauma. Little t trauma is any situation where even though physical danger is not actually imminent, you still are powerless to change your situation or to leave. So, being born into a society where your race, gender, sexuality, religion is marginalized or ostracized is trauma. Being forced to grow up too fast because of a lack of resources and support is trauma. Being expected to suppress your emotions without being given tools to understand or navigate them is also trauma. Now, there's an interesting barrier that I see when I am working with people with little t trauma that some of you are probably having right now, which is that people with little t trauma have a lot of shame and guilt and reject the overall notion that what they've experienced even counts as trauma, right? They often say things like, well, other people had it so much worse. Or, I'm just grateful I didn't grow up like X, Y, and Z. And I hear you, because when I was being bullied, and like, low-key, I know why I was being bullied. But I used to tell myself, there are starving children in Africa, so I need to suck it up. But here's a question I really wish somebody had asked me. Does me denying my experience do anything to feed the starving children? Recognizing and understanding your trauma is not an application to the Guinness Book of World Records for most traumatized individual. Compassion, creativity, curiosity, those are the antidotes to trauma, and none of those are limited or finite resources. But in order to access those resources, you need to be able to acknowledge that you have experienced trauma and that you deserve support. Now, you're probably a little bristly right now because it shows up differently in different communities and experiences, but there's this general belief that feelings are at best unproductive and at worst indulgent or a luxury. And that's actually not true. The T is that our emotions are actually all very specific and purposeful ways that help us understand ourselves. For example, do you know that tears have endorphins in them? It is your body's natural way of bringing you back to regulation and helping you release whatever pain you're feeling, whether it is physical or emotional. And actually, learning how to healthily express and navigate your feelings is the Alka-Seltzer to that emotional constipation we was talking about called trauma. Now, raise your hand if you've ever been told, hush up all that crying and I'll give you something to cry about. All right, great, hands down. Raise your hand if hearing that has ever felt validating or comforting or done anything to alleviate whatever it was that you were crying about. Yeah, I don't see no hands. Now listen, I don't actually think there's anything that the intention and idea behind that phrase is not bad. Children do need to be taught that they're not gonna always get their way. And I know that when I do anything to make my service dog whimper, I beat myself up for days. So I can only imagine what it is like as a caregiver to see your kid in pain or crying. So the dual intention of both not wanting to see your kid in pain and also wanting to make sure that your children know how to navigate and negotiate and differentiate between what's a big deal and what's small potatoes is not inherently bad. And I know. Acknowledging ways that our loved ones have shown up in ways that haven't been as helpful can be a hashtag struggle, because we are so grateful for everything that our loved ones have done for us. And we know that they did the best that they could with what they had. The thing is that intention versus impact doesn't actually get a family discount. Children cannot learn to regulate emotions they are not allowed to have. And they become adults who don't know how to regulate their emotions, who find inappropriate and maladaptive ways to navigate how big their feelings are because they do not understand them. And learning to navigate your feelings is that's how we all get better. Otherwise, we're just all walking around here emotionally constipated and we don't know how to act. So, not only are your feelings valid, but learning to express them and understand them is the key to moving from surviving to thriving and freeing yourself from your trauma. Thank you, everybody. I am Imari Hardon. You can find me on all the social media as the Thespian Therapist. Thank you, Darkness Rising, and have a great time.